Yes, now. So, good afternoon and sorry for being late again. Welcome to this press conference following the Foreign Affairs Council today. The HRVP will brief you about the outcome of today's meeting, and then we have time for a few questions. High Representative, you have the floor.
Gracias, Maria. Thank you to all of you. Today has been an intense. It has been an intense meeting, as always, and we took an important number of decisions, not only discussing and analyzing, but also deciding. An important decisions which underpin the European Union resolve on supporting Ukraine against Russia's aggression, defending peace and stability in the South Caucasus, and standing for human rights in Iran. This could be a good summary, underpinning our resolve on supporting Ukraine, advancing peace and stability in the South Caucasus, another concrete decision, and standing for human rights in Iran. We had the opportunity of exchanging with Minister Dimitro Kuleba, who addressed the Council by video conference from a bomb shelter. I think it is the first time that we discuss with a minister that communicates with us from a bomb shelter, while Russia was continuing its strikes on Kiev. And I want to say clearly, supporting Ukraine remains our first priority. Today, the first priority of the European Union foreign policy, of the European Union short, without foreign policy, is to support Ukraine facing this brutal invasion. Putin is losing. Putin is losing politically and morally. In spite of that, he continues the escalation, including indiscriminated attacks on civilian targets across the whole Ukraine, as we have seen this morning. We also took note of the vote at UNGA last week. This vote confirmed the international isolation of Russia. But we cannot take it for granted, and we need to stay the course based on our triple strategy: supporting Ukraine, pressuring Russia, and addressing the wider fallout of the war, because this war is affecting the whole world. I said about concrete decisions. Let me precise about these concrete decisions that we took today in order to support Ukraine. First, we agreed on establishing an European Union military assistance mission to support the Ukrainian armed forces. That will be happening in European Union soil. The training will take place in European Union soil, and the mission has a purpose. It's to train around 15,000 troops to start with, maybe more, but the first objective is to train 15,000 troops, with the added value of doing that all member states together, additionally to the activities that many of them are already doing on their side. Second, we also agreed to allocate another 500 million euros from the European Peace Facility to finance deliveries to the Ukrainian defense forces. As you know, this brings the military assistance of the European Union through this intergovernmental fund. I want to stress it's not part of the European Union budget, approved by the Parliament, is aside, is a fund decided by the member states together and managed by them. It amounts to 3.1 billion euros. But once again, this is the point of the iceberg. There are much more coming from the member states. We continue discovering mass atrocities and reports about systematic kidnapping of children from Ukraine by Russian forces. If confirmed, this would amount to another war crime, and the fight against impunity must be strengthened. We have already discussed about how to do it. Out from Ukraine, the ministers also green-lighted the deployment of monitors from the European Union in Georgia, the Georgia mission, to Armenia, to the Armenian side of the border with Azerbaijan. A team is already there, and according with the green light of the Council, we will deploy 40 monitors on the Armenian side of the international border with Azerbaijan in the next weeks. Very quickly. I am really proud of how quickly we have managed the creation and deployment of this mission. And our presence in the conflict in the Caucasus between these two countries is a significant signal of the European Union readiness to support the stability in the South Caucasus. This has been based on the demand from the partners, and as I said, the team is already on the ground in Armenia, and the deployment will be very quickly. Then about Iran. In Iran also we have taken decisions. From yesterday night we are following the situation in Evin prison very closely. I personally convey my concerns and expectations to the Foreign Minister Abdullahi in the hours following the fire, in order to ensure the safety of the inmates, all inmates, but also including some European, could I say, political prisoners. We are certainly appalled by the still unexplained killing of Mahsa Amini, by the brutal crackdown of security forces against protesters who continue to die or being detained in the hands of the security forces. All ministers express their strong concern about these facts and this situation. The latest reports the Council has been studying, coming from NGOs, state that over 100 people have died. According with this fact, and according with the proposal of several member states studied by the ambassadors, the Council adopted today restrictive measures against 11 individuals and 4 entities, targeting those linked to the death of Mahsa Amini and to the repression of peaceful protesters. And if needed, we are ready to add more names to this list. I want to use this opportunity to call on the Iranian government to immediately end the violence, to release those detained, and to allow normal internet services and flow of information. The issue of the use of drones by Russia, allegedly supplied by Iran in the war in Ukraine, had been also considered by the ministers. And certainly Minister Kuleba, during his speech to the ministers, strongly expressed his concern, and he denounced the use of this kind of arms. We are following very closely this use of drones and working with our partners. The debate on China will continue, but it was symbolic that today, just one day after the speech of President Xi and on the eve of the European Union Council discussing about our China relations, the Council received the first report, taking into account the messages sent by President Xi on his speech. On Bosnia and Herzegovina, we discussed the last elections. The elections were competitive and well organized. overall, according with the reports of the OCE, ODIR, but they were also marked by quite a strong mistrust in public institutions. The final result has still to be certified. There are allegations of widespread electoral fraud have triggered a recount of ballots to the Republican president's race, and this recounting will take place. But we need to keep Bosnia and Herzegovina on the European Union path. That's why the European Commission recommended last week to grant the candidate status to Bosnia and Herzegovina on the understanding that a certain number of steps are taken. And with that, we pass a clear message to the Bosnia and Herzegovina authorities. First, they must be swiftly setting up at all levels, both the government and legislative authorities. And secondly, they have focused on delivering reforms. This is a matter of absolute priority. There is a window of opportunity, a new push for the process of Bosnia and Herzegovina towards the European Union, and this occasion has to be seized by the politically responsible authorities of the country. We remain extremely concerned about the socio-economic situation in Lebanon, the inability of the political forces to proceed with much-needed reforms. We call on Lebanese authorities to elect a new president before the end of the month, and we welcome the agreement between Lebanon and Israel on the delineation of their maritime borders. In this moment, in this troubled world, this is certainly a good news. And last but not least, we discussed about the situation in Ethiopia. Knowing that the situation on the ground has never been that bad, both on military and humanitarian fronts. We reiterate our belief that there is no military solution. The only solution is a political one. We call for a cessation of hostilities. We call for the withdrawal of Eritrean forces. We call for an immediate and unimpeded humanitarian access to Tigray. We call for accountability for human rights and international law violations. We call for the government of Ethiopia and Tigrayan leaders to put in practice and to turn in concrete actions the invitation sent by the African Union to start peace talks. The long process of mediation has to continue, and we are supporting it in close coordination with international partners, but unhappily we have to recognize that this mediation process by the time being has not delivered enough. We need this mediation process to be more proactive and deliver more, and for that these long-announced talks has to start and be translated in concrete actions, opening to humanitarian access the front line in Tigray, and asking for ceasefire, withdrawal of Eritrean forces, and accountability for human rights violations. This is my resume of this very profitable meeting with a strong agreement among member states on a common evaluation of the situation in the different issues and adopting quickly this set of measures. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we proceed to your questions. And Christian, you have the first question. Oui.
I'm going to ask I was going to answer the question in Spanish to be sure that I master well
Tu peux poser en espagnol ta question, si tu veux.
Je vais pas oser, non. C'est pas une langue de travail.
Well, it's not one of my working languages, I'm afraid. Perhaps I just use Spanish for private purposes, not for work, I have to confess. Two questions during which you touched on during your press statement. Mr. Koluba, during his intervention, asked for a 9th package of sanctions and also asked that sanctions be taken against Iran for supplying drones. What is the state of play on this 9th package of sanctions? I know it's still being worked on, but we know that we don't quite know what one could really add to the existing sanctions. And then as regards Iranian drones, I just wonder what proof is still lacking. These drones are clearly signed by Iran. What additional proof is needed? That's my first question. Second question, a little bit more lighthearted. I wonder whether you were fully understood during your intervention in Bruges. You compared Europe to a garden and the rest of the world to a jungle, which is perhaps fully understandable to most people, but some accused you of being a representative of the American neocons or a racist, or advise you to take retirement. So do you feel that you put your foot in it? Do you feel that you were misunderstood? Or could you perhaps shed some light?
Con mucho gusto. Acerca del...
Well, thank you for your question. Regarding Minister Kuleba's interventions and what he said on sanctions. Well, he welcomed the new packet of sanctions package. He obviously encouraged us, called upon us to maintain and continue pressure, economic pressure on Russia. He also explained to us how the authorities view Russia's use of, in their view, Iranian-manufactured drones. They are being used by the Russians. Some of those have been shot down by the anti-aircraft. Now, on the sanctions specifically, we've only a few days ago approved a new set of sanctions. It's an ongoing process, though, when it comes to sanctions. We're continuing our work. It's work in progress when it comes to sanctions. Now, on work in progress, I can't give you details of what any putative new sanctions might entail, because we're working on these things. However, we're always thinking about different ways, about other ways in which we can make life difficult for Putin in terms of funding his war effort, and we're looking at ways of building materials to that end. There will be sanctions as and when we identify the sort of targets we can aim at. On drones more specifically, well, you know that these processes have to be based on evidence. Evidence exists. It has been provided by the relevant intelligence services, including Ukrainian intelligence services. Other member states of Council have also called for evidence to be got together in a coordinated and comprehensive way. Iran categorically denies, and has to me, the minister, categorically denied to me personally, that there were any drones that had been sent to be used in the war in Ukraine. However, member states have asked us to go forward to collect evidence, all the available evidence, and on that basis work will continue as appropriate. There was nothing specific on the agenda today, so we couldn't take decisions on this. However, the work is ongoing. Ukraine is absolutely convinced that they are under this sort of attack, and will continue to provide us with evidence to that end. On the other question you raised, perhaps I could say a little bit more in answer to it. Let me see. For a long time now, I've been saying that in my view, since the Second World War, the EU, the European adventure, was what led us to be able to build what I called, in all modesty, the best combination of political freedom, economic progress, economic well-being, and social cohesion. These three things together have made Europe a place where citizens have the advantage of living in an organized society built around those three pillars. And these are not three e.g. things to find across our world. You may have political freedom and economic progress, not social cohesion. There are other countries where they progress economically but they don't have political freedoms. Unfortunately, there are some places in the world where they don't have economic progress or well-being or stability on a political sense or freedom. Now, I'm not saying there aren't other countries like Canada, Australia, I could go on with a long, long list, where we have very similar models and outcomes. But, quite frankly, I believe firmly that these three aspects in combination make Europe what it is, where a lot of people live and where a lot of people would like to be able to live. Now, I may not have always expressed this properly. And what I was trying to say to the students in Bruges in this particular case was that they should not believe that in other parts of the world, the rest of the world, not all over the rest of the world, but in other parts of the world, you can't take this well-being for granted. There are places in the country where they don't have the freedom or the well-being or not enough economic or social cohesion. They had to be aware that they shouldn't believe that what we had in Europe, was available everywhere else. And that you have to have this commitment going forward, including to the rest of the world. Now, we can't build walls around Europe and isolate ourselves. We cannot be an island in the world away from what's going on elsewhere. It was a message against Fortress Europe, about let's close ourselves in and keep the others out. I was speaking to young students and asking them to make a commitment, a bit like my generation did, in all modesty, and as I did when I was younger. A commitment to the rest of the world. That we have values to transmit, and what they mean, the freedoms, and what we've achieved are there to be shared. Because we are in competition with other models, other political models. There is a risk, there is a threat. Europe is under threat, I've said it before. The war in Ukraine, the war against Ukraine, just shows that and what those threats can be. I do not understand the interpretation that has been given to what I said. I certainly do not share the allegation this is somehow imperialist, white supremacist, or retrograde message. Far from it. It was meant as a message of solidarity, speaking to young Europeans, telling them that they have this good fortune. I say this to my grandchildren. They are so lucky to live where they do, in this free, organized world built around economic well-being and social solidarity. But this in turn brings an obligation towards the rest of the world. As Europeans, we have to step up to the plate and commit more. That is the guarantee for the survival of our own model. I am therefore disappointed to hear some of the interpretations that have been bandied around. I reject them totally. I think everything I've done in my life completely goes against being called a neocon or anything of that ilk.
Thank you, Sándor from Euronews Hungary. My question is regarding Hungary. So, this government of Viktor Orbán just started a massive anti-EU sanctions campaign. They even put a big billboard which says a big bomb called sanctions. This is dropped on us by the EU. How do you see this campaign, and how do you see, the latest Hungarian position of having a constructive abstention with regard to the Ukrainian training mission? So keeping Hungary on board and having this position, is it a success or a failure for the EU's foreign policy lines? Thank you.
Yo estoy convencido de que las sanciones.
I am convinced that the sanctions against the Russian economy work and will work ever better. Today we got the latest report on the effect of those sanctions. Look, I'm not going to draw more analogies because then everything gets misinterpreted. So I'll hold my peace here, but sanctions don't trigger an impact overnight. They take time, but they start to bite, and they do bite. It's a mistake to think that sanctions were an error. However, I respect everyone's opinion. All I can say is that Hungary, so far, has voted in favour of all the sanctions, or has not opposed them. And now, again, through constructive abstention, they have allowed the military training mission to go forward. Now, what I can say is what happens when there's a vote and a decision to be taken. Hungary has never impeded or prevented that decision from going forward, whatever that decision was at the time.
Now I will turn to colleagues who are connected remotely, and I give the floor to Rosie.
Thank you very much. Rosie Birchard for Feature Story News. High Representative, on China, did any member state ask for a redesignation of China away from the 2019 three-pronged approach, particularly perhaps with regards to the classification as a rival? And what do you think an expected third term of presidency means for EU-China relations? Will they get worse? Thank you very much.
We need a microphone for the speaker.
Microphone.
No está abierto. ¿Está abierto? Sí, sí, está abierto. No ha habido ningún.
There was no objection of substance to the text we had tabled. As you know, there's the threefold description of the state of play. Perhaps what I would say is that the competition aspect, I mean, you have a partner, competitor, rival. That's the three triptych I mentioned. Now, the central one is competitor, and maybe that one has become more central, if you see what I mean, in today's discussion. The message from China now is one of competing on a political level, their economic success, their desire to have influence at all sorts of levels, their presence in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America and elsewhere. That's the first discussion point we had. We analysed President Xi's speech, which is a very strong statement about their desire to have influence across the world. The Chinese Communist Party has taken a decision. It's not up to us to discuss that, but we have to discuss with China on a number of points. We can't solve the big problems of the world without China. We have to talk to China. We have to engage, to use an English term, in all those areas where we need to, but engage in a way that stays clear-headed, bearing in mind that of the three prongs, the three dimensions we've talked about for lots of time, right now competition is probably the most salient.
Thank you very much. Thomas Kutschka, Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. High Representative, when you presented your proposal for an EU military assistance or training mission in late August, the support from member states was not very strong. Many wondered what the added value would be. Now, in the meantime, something must have happened that changed the mind of member states, because this presumably is one of the biggest or the biggest training missions. Can you please explain what happened politically between the end of August and now, the decision you've taken today? And more concretely, The 15,000 soldiers that you mentioned, do you expect them to be trained by, let's say, early next year or over the course of 2 years? Thank you.
No puedo darle.
Well, I can't give you a strict chronology of how the 15,000 will pan out. 15,000 in one bunch? No, it's going to be one squad after another. The rhythm, the way, the means and progress will depend on how the program runs and our activities within that program. I hope that by the middle of November, though, less than a month from now, we will have got the mission up and running. The 15,000 won't be all there at the same time on week one. That's not the aim. And they're not going to be trained in a week. But the idea is a minimum length of 2 years, a minimum length of 2 years for the mission overall. Depends on how the war pans out and the way it develops. But I agree with you about the initial reticence that existed, but it was relatively quickly overcome. At the start of the summer, the Informal Defence Council, when this idea was first mooted, there were a lot of questions around the table, and these doubts were answered, discussed, understanding came. The understanding that synergies coming from acting together was better than doing things in dispersed order. And then, unfortunately, as well, the increase in Russian attacks, the manner of those attacks, that unfortunately had the effect, or those unfortunate events had the effect of strengthening the resolve to go forward, amongst others.
Mr. Borrell, my name is Kasra Naji. I'm from the BBC Persian television in London. I just wanted to ask you about the sanctions announced today against Iran. Many Iranians that I talk to ask me, what are the point of these sanctions? The people that you have sanctioned, they never come to Europe. They don't have assets in Europe. Basically, these sanctions have no impact on them or on the freedom of the Iranians on the streets in the cities of Iran. So the point is, why these sanctions? Why not something that actually matters to people of Iran? Just outside here this morning, there was a demonstration just outside your conference, and there was a demonstration calling for sanctions against Iran's Revolutionary Guards, for example. There are opposition figures who are asking for lowering the level of diplomatic relations with Iran, throwing out ambassadors, even closing down the embassies. All sorts of measures that could be taken that are not taken, and these symbolic sanctions are hardly going to get anywhere. Is it because you still hope for reaching some kind of a deal with on the JCPOA front, or what is it? Thank you.
Estas son las sanciones.
Well, these are personal sanctions, the type of initial sanctions, personal sanctions that the EU tends to take, impeding access to our territory, etc., assets, and so on. Targeted at some persons, not all, some more than others within the list, but I assure you that the government of Iran will not like this. It is going to matter to the government because of the political impact, because the effect of the message is what it is, and it will be clearly understood as such. It will certainly not change the lives of Iranians overnight, let alone the lives of the protesters against the regime, but it's part of the political process. It's not the last such decision we will take, probably, but it is how we start a process of manifest disapproval in circumstances like the ones we are seeing in Iran.
Hello, thank you for the question. Well, if the evidence, the evidence gathering process is successful and you are satisfied that Iran it is indeed sending drones to Russia, You said that in that case the EU will act. So I would like to ask you if there is enough, do you think there is enough support from the member states in that, and especially doesn't that give also a message that if a third party is clearly supplying arms to Russia, in this case Iran, then maybe the European states can step up and also support different kind of arms to Ukraine? Do you see that that debate could happen at some point? Thanks.
Francamente, creo que en este tema los Estados miembros han demostrado.
Frankly, on this, member states have already shown great unity, very consistent, shared concern and unified response. They've all asked for all the evidence to be collected, everything that's necessary to be done in a comprehensive way, irrefutable way, and this is a major factor in determining their attitude. Once all the evidence is available, and there is a lot already, I don't think there will be any problem in future steps by member states.
We are not going to take 100 questions.
No, so that's why it's over. Thank you very much for your patience. Thank you, High Representative.
Just a short question. Can I ask you?
No, it's over.
It's about the Iranian people, because Iranian people...
Sorry.
Thanks.